I'm Giovanna Lemes. I am an implementation manager here at Mixpanel, and essentially my role is to help customers on board and get started with their Mixpanel implementation. So as part of this series that Kylie has been putting together, she's asked me to come on over and talk to you guys about what I'm calling 6 tips to bulletproofing your implementation. So hopefully you'll all get to take some valuable lessons from here today, and we'll also have sections here and there where you guys can interact and hopefully just give us some feedback and see, let us know what resonates, and see if you guys have any questions that we can help you throughout your analytics program. So let's go ahead and get started. And, looking at this really should be no surprise to anyone on this call, right? So these days, businesses have mountains of data generated from people using their products on all kinds of devices, right? From apps to websites, smart devices. There is no shortage of data whatsoever. And companies are sitting on a gold mine of product data. But despite this abundance of data available to all of product teams, in a recent survey of nearly 500 product leaders across the globe that was conducted by Mixpanel in collaboration with Product School, they found that only 10% reported being able to validate all of their important product decisions with data. So think about that, right? They're sitting on an abundance of data, but despite all of that, only 10% reported being able to validate important product decisions with data. So, and we're finding also that this is across the industry. So as we can see here on the bottom, this happens in the B2B industries, media, finance, consumer tech, retail. It's across the board. And we're finding that product teams in the B2B space are struggling the most, but essentially across the board, we're finding that, at least 38% of them feel that they're unable to effectively measure their most important metrics. And we're finding that having the data is essentially not that end all beat all, right? So what we're finding in these results when we dug a little deeper is that this seems to indicate that having the data is not enough. And we wanted to understand a little bit more of why that is the case, right? So if you have the data, why is there such a discrepancy between having all the data and still not being able to make data-driven decisions? And what they've found is that there are a series of contributing factors to measuring the metrics that matter most. So if we look here, what they found, some say, a majority say that they don't have access to the right data, or the data that they need, or they don't trust the data. That's, number 2, that's a big one. They have access to the data, but lack the technical resources, right? So across the board with these, the reasons and the barriers that we heard from customers, we essentially believe that a proper implementation can help mitigate, at the very least, 3 of these. So while, there are certain things, whether, you have access to the right data, a proper implementation may not be able to do much about that, but having, the right mechanisms in place, we firmly believe that you should be able to address at least some of these. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And we found that making data useful requires time and planning. And so here at Mixpanel, we have, this idea of laying the right foundation. And what we do is we follow this methodology where we focus the first 60 days on planning and architecting your implementation. So we have the plan phase, which is really identify your stakeholders, review your business objectives, build out your implementation spec. And then from there, we have the implement phase. And this is where you really get to architect your implementation. So you ensure data accuracy, you do your quality assessments, your quality controls, and then you push things to production. From there, we have, what we call this ongoing success services side of things, where you can train, discover, optimize. And as you'll see throughout the future courses and sessions that Kylie will run over to you guys, you'll be focusing on some of those. But so for today, we'll be focusing on how you can actually lay that right foundation. And that's by focusing on planning and implementing. Now, this actually brings us to tip number one. So tip number one is to really take the time to plan. So whether you're building out a brand new implementation from scratch or you're revisiting your existing program, your existing analytics program, really take the time to plan and take a look and say, okay, what is our focus? What are our goals? What are we trying to achieve, right? When you do that, essentially we found, here we go. We found that we work here in Mixpanel with this proven methodology. As you can see below, we've proven that on average, we get higher engagement, higher value moments, and so forth. But so the idea here is that we have these three main pillars. And again, the optimization piece will be something that you'll be covering later on in the future sessions with Kylie, but today I really want to focus on how you can address your strategy, your implementation strategy, and your analytics strategy, actually, your entire analytics strategy, and then how you can actually transform that over into the actual setup. So the first thing we'll need to do is actually develop a measurement framework. And this means connecting your business goals to your analytics strategy. Once you have that in place, then we need to determine what actually matters to you. And then we can actually figure out what the actual events are that we need to come in order to reflect those business goals and metrics that you identified previously, right? And now some of you, obviously may be asking yourselves, okay, but we've already set everything up. We've already done, the planning phase. We're already live. We've been live for a while. So how do I plan an implementation that's already taken place? And this actually leads us to tip number two, which is to keep your implementation dynamic. So really you want to be able to iterate in the future. And as necessary. We know that, as business goals and priorities shift, so too should your analytics strategy and your configuration, right? So even if you've had a live analytics program for months or years, you can still also go back and reevaluate. And today we'll be showing you the guidelines for how you can do that and some of the best practices for how you can address your analytics strategy as well as your analytics setup, whether you're starting from scratch or revisiting your implementation. So one of the main questions we get once we start working with our customers, when they start out with their analytics program and coming over to Mixpanel, one of the main questions that we get asked often is, where do I start? And without having a clear indication for where to start, some customers take the route of tracking everything. And if I'm looking at Kylie and some of you, I can imagine, some people cringing because that is actually our tip number three, which is to do not track everything. Essentially what will happen is if you do start tracking everything, you'll end up rich in data, but poor in insights. And we certainly don't want that. So we understand also that there's not a single one-size-fits-all approach. And what we found is that over the years, as we've partnered with hundreds of companies on their analytics strategy and trying to understand what works for them, we found that there's no single set of metrics and KPIs that works for everyone, right? We understand that businesses and products are complex, they're unique, and they have different goals based on your stage, your ambitions, and so forth. So how do we make that scalable, right? How do we develop something that works for everyone, but is not a single, one metric that wouldn't work across the board? And that's where frameworks come in. So Kylie, I'll pass it over to you as one of our experts in the field of measurement frameworks, so you can walk everybody through this section.
Yeah, so we'll dive into this a little bit more as Giovanna walks through the rest of the presentation, but this is the quick introduction to the shape of our framework. Really what your team will be ideally doing is rallying around a focus metric and having that have its home inside of Mixpanel, ideally in some sort of dashboard and a report that's easily shareable and easily digestible. And then we'll watch that kind of trickle down into level 1 metrics that are focused on specific steps in the user's journey. And then level 2 metrics, which are going to be broken down more by like what an individual contributor or a small team can do to move the needle on one of those steps in the user journey. So something that can be like owned by like a person, or maybe like 2 or 3 people working on one initiative, one sprint, one project, that will like impact the overall portion of a journey you're trying to improve, and then impact the overall like active usage that you're driving for your users. And the way we break them down is something that Giovanna has come up with here, this 4 M's and a T. So we really, when we're goal setting, want to focus on these bullet points so that we're making good high fiber goals. The first thing, is it meaningful? Which seems pretty straightforward, but is often overlooked by like many of the customers I work with. Like, is it meaningful is asking, like, does this goal actually align with what your product is providing for your customers? And will your customers find a moment of value with like the different steps in the journey or the different events in your platform that you're serving up? Then, is it measurable? This is probably the second most overlooked in goal setting. It's, can we put a number to this? Is it quantifiable? Is it based on feelings or anecdotes, or is it just something that we like to talk about? Or is it really like we can move this number by 10%, or we want to see a jump or a decrease by like 20 or 15 users? Like, there is something tangible about it. And then, is it manageable? Is it based on something that we can control? Like things like seasonality or other ebbs and flows and what you've got going on, like based on what vertical you're in, might impact a KPI, right? If you're in like fintech and you have tax season coming up in March and April, like maybe you're going to see a spike in your KPI, and that was going to happen anyway. So we have to like have a mindset that's like, this is something we can actually put our hands on and maintain ourselves. And then, is it movable? Like, we can quantify it and align it to our business and then make it something that's like got its ground in what we're providing to our customers. But is it something that's going to change? Is it something that if we make a change, if we add a blue button, if we add a green button, if we streamline our workflow, like this will move the needle and impact our KPI, reduce churn, increase activation, drive retention, whatever it might be? Like, is this something that we can change?
Yeah, and then we have my favorite, which is the time bound. Just makes it perfect, you know, have the 4 M's of the T. And the reason I love it so much is because I guess all of these, you know, can be often overlooked, but the time sensitive one is, the time bound one is really one that is really impactful for me. So as an implementation manager, as I see, you know, customers going through the process of identifying their KPIs and their metrics, I often find that having a time-oriented or a time period KPI is not really something that they're thinking about. So it's very crucial that as you're coming up with your metrics and your KPIs, that you're tracking them in a time-sensitive way and in a factor that works for you, right? So some KPIs you should be looking at a 6-month basis, others you should be looking at a 1-month basis or a weekly basis, right? So just keep that in mind as you're starting to think about your KPIs and your metrics. We also wanted to share with you guys some quick ideas of certain metrics that we do see come up a lot, and ways that you can avoid them, and how you can actually get around and transform them into meaningful and impactful metrics and KPIs for your business. So the first one that we see here is vanity metrics, and we see this come up all the time. And essentially, we find that vanity metrics do not necessarily correlate to the numbers that really matter to you or that really matter for your business. So in fact, they may even make you look good, but it does not help you understand your performance in a way that informs future strategies. So instead, we recommend opting for value metrics. So one perfect example that I like to give all the time is time spent. So sometimes we'll have customers say, yeah, you know, we have this website. I want to see how long customers or, you know, our users are spending on this one particular page. And one of the reasons why that can be an inflated vanity metric is, you can imagine, you know, somebody has their computer open, they go away, and so you end up, it ends up looking like somebody spent a really long time on your website on a particular page, when that wasn't necessarily the case, right? That wasn't really a reflection of a user getting value from your product, right? It's just something that seems to look good, but it's not really, it doesn't really inform strategies or decisions or anything valuable to you. So instead, we recommend connecting those with meaningful actions. So for example, instead of simply looking at how long did someone look at this page, you could say, how long did it take for someone on this page to click on a call to action button that we have? Or how long between they landed on this page before they took the action that we wanted them to take? How long before they were on this page until they played a video? You know, something like that. So really, again, you're not just looking at those vanity metrics, but you're tying them into valuable insights from your product. The second one is what we call the lagging metrics. And essentially lagging metrics are output measurements, right? Whereas leading metrics, on the other hand, help you anticipate and predict what will happen. So a great example that I love giving here is revenue. And this comes up often, and we're certainly not saying that revenue is not important. It's certainly important and definitely something you want to track. But essentially what we're saying is as you build it out in terms of your KPIs and metrics and what you're going to be looking at from your analytics program standpoint, it doesn't really indicate or show you what's about to happen, and shows you what's already happened, right? So if you look at revenues for the month, that'll give you the revenues for the month. Whereas what we would recommend in this case is, for example, looking at orders per user or average amount spent per user. So if you know on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, your users shop or make X orders per month, or they spend X amount of dollars per month, as you look week over week, you'll be able to tell, whoa, they're way below the average. That's probably going to lead to a smaller revenue at the end of the month, right? So that's a better indicator and there's something that you can do about that, right? So you can actually try and drive those orders up, on those values up, right? So it gives you an indication of what's coming. Next, we have many correlated metrics. And essentially, again, this kind of gives us the idea of, you know, what are users doing? And we'll see customers want to track, you know, they click here and they go to this page and then this page and then that page, but it doesn't really give you value, right? It doesn't really tell you much about what that user is getting in terms of valuable, meaningful interactions with your site. It tells you what they're doing, which, you know, can also have its merits for you and your business. But again, the idea here is that you want to interlace those intervals with actual meaningful action. So if you're looking at funnels, for example, that's a great place where instead of simply saying, you know, did they go from this page to this page or that, you can start to interlace specific actions. And again, those call CTA buttons and options that you have to see how they're actually getting there. And then finally, the last metric that we highly recommend avoiding here are the metrics that you can manipulate, right? So perfect example here is having CSAT, so customer satisfaction score, as your one metric that matters. And again, we're certainly not saying that it's not an important metric and something that you should be looking at. You certainly should be looking at it. What we're saying is that it probably shouldn't be your number one metric and your focus and your holy grail of metrics. And there are a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons here is that, as you can see, you know, it is something that you can manipulate, and you can create different formulas around it, who gets sent the survey, who doesn't, and so forth. So again, you can see how this can be inflated to make to make it look perhaps a little better than what it is. So we recommend still having in there, but perhaps lower in your measurement framework at some point, perhaps as a secondary measurement, but certainly not as your number one metric. And we'll get into that now in more detail as Kylie, masterfully walks us through how to actually go through putting together your measurement framework.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a quick pause and see if there was any question from anyone listening about metrics to avoid or why we should avoid them. Any thoughts or any quick interjections from the team? Sometimes it's new information. Yeah, being told not to track ARR as a primary target is sometimes a little bit of a heated chat. Okay, well then we'll just keep on moving on, and I will dive into this focus metric right now. So what we want to do is have like this top tier of your focus metric be your metric that matters most. And this is like kind of the reason your entire team, your whole org, whole company is hitting the pavement every day in an attempt to bring value to users in your product. This is for everyone on the squad, and it is based, or we recommend that it's based around active usage. So like if you're a fitness app or like a meal logging app or something like TikTok or Instagram, that active usage could be daily, and you want to drive daily video watchers or daily meal loggers. If you're like a monthly app, something like a bank or like some method of paying rent, right? Then you're looking at like once a month on the 15th or once a month at the first of the month. So your monthly active usage should be what your whole team is driving toward, where people are finding value. If you're something like Mixpanel, like a work tool, maybe something users should be visiting like every couple of days, like weekly report viewers or weekly, metrics of that nature are the best and the metrics that matter most for how your users are unpacking value when they journey through your product, and how they'll understand that they're differentiating your product as better or more loyal than another product that does something maybe similar. So then we roll this down into our level 1 metrics. And the level 1 metrics are meant to capture different phases of the user journey that will together, like holistically drive your active usage or your activity daily, weekly, or monthly for your users and your use case. So the first thing is reach. And while this might kind of signify just like the all-in number of users you can touch, it's really about like having like, again, that high fiber quality of user that might take that that full stride into activation later. So while kind of in the same nature of like page views or like CSAT is kind of like not really helpful, right? Reach, where we're looking at like total number of downloads or total number of signups, might not always get it done, because you want someone who's catalyzed or like started to blossom into like a soon to be active user. So reach might be installed and commented, or signed up and like added a friend, like done some low level initializing step that says like this person could be here to like develop into a loyal user down the road. So it's kind of like the first baby step in your user journey through your product. And then when a user takes full stride for the first time, that's when they've activated. So that's when they've done something that really shows a user has gone a step further into a mission critical step, or like your metric that matters even, right? So that's when a user has decided like they have taken the kinetic energy it needs to like really unpack what you're providing in your product and done it. They've hit that moment of value and have experienced what it is you're trying to provide. Engagement takes that stride and gets users running. So this is now when a user is like coming back again and again, or has like unpacked a number of different moments of value, right? They've liked, commented, added a friend, added 10 friends, or set up a checking account, set up a banking account, and ordered a credit card. Like this is when a user has become like loyal and understanding of the product that you're providing, and like wants to evangelize or wants to really dive in to all the different features, right? On a YouTube, that might be they're looking at 2 or 3 videos a day, or maybe watching on Netflix a movie and a show and something else. It could be that they've spanned like a number of quarters, or like there's something that says this user is critically engaged in the product and they know how to use it. And then retention is going to be the measurement, usually based around your activity, right? So if you're looking at weekly active users, you probably want like 2-week retention. How many users are active this week and coming back the following week? If you're looking at monthly activation, you want to know how many users you had month 0, come back in month 1, come back in month 2, and like be those repeat users. Like how often are people coming back to unpack your moment of value and drive value out of your product? And then the business specific one is really, it may or may not be like super related to the user journey, but it might be very critical for your business model and what you're doing in your vertical with your app and your users. This is something that might be like good churn for a dating app or a home buying app, where we're looking at where we do want to drive down actually the number of users, right? Like a person comes, buys a house, like that means they did the thing they were supposed to do. Or maybe it is ARR. Maybe you're looking like you really do need to present to the board and say like, this is how much money our users are bringing to the table. Like those are fine and they are good to have, but they need to be kind of separate from the rest of our progress through the user journey. And then, lastly, those are all owned, kind of in the vein of your focus metric being owned by your whole org. Your level 1 metrics are going to be owned by like C-suite or director level leadership, like whole swaths of a team or a silo in your business will be responsible for like that whole chunk of reach, activation, engagement, or retention through the user journey. And then as we roll down to level 2 metrics, that's where you might have like your small team, like just like one function, like a couple of product managers are focused on one part, or a couple of CSMs are focused on another, right? So you have your level 2 metrics, and those are like more nuanced, broken out under each of those higher categories. So you may have reach for North America and have like a PMM or the rest of a marketing team like really focused on building events and building outreach for North America, and then another group in EMEA. You might have, engagement flow as like a charge for a PM on Android, or you might have that for someone on web, right? So this is where we get really nuanced and task people with sprints or like product initiatives that will help them move the needle, like as an individual or a small team. And that's where we get real change, like streamline and focus, like per feature or per segment, that we then roll up to like move the needle at a higher range, and then like really drive activity across the board.
And Kylie, this is going to be my shameless plug here for Mixpanel. The good thing is that we have this framework actually available on our help center today with everything Kylie just walked you through, all of the details of how you can put this together. So again, whether you're brand new to Mixpanel or you've been with Mixpanel for a really long time, you can always take that time to go back and dynamically assess your metrics, your goals, or even if you did this, if you have done it before, it shouldn't be static, right? So you can always go back, take a look, and see if there's something that you can revisit and readdress. So after today's session, definitely go on over to our resources, take a look and see if this is something that you can apply to your analytics program. Perfect. So now that we have a strategy in place, the goal really is to start tying those metrics and KPIs to your actual tracking plan, right? So you're probably thinking, okay, great, we've done all that. Now, how do I get the events in? What do I make them look like? How do we actually do that? So to get into that, I first wanted to cover just very quickly a little bit of basics of Mixpanel. So for those of you not familiar with Mixpanel, Mixpanel employs an event-based, user-centric model that tracks specific actions that individual users take within your product. So the first term you're going to hear me talking a lot about today, which I have already said over and over before, is events, right? So events are essentially any specific user behavior that your users are logging. So example of events, as we can see here, we have they signed up as an event, they searched a song, they played a song, they created a playlist, and so forth. Now, you may be thinking, okay, great, but this still doesn't give you enough detail, right? So even though you know someone searched a song, or even more importantly, they played a song, you still don't know, well, what song did they play? How long did they play it for? What genre was it? When was it released? And that's where event properties come in. So event properties are properties that describe the details of the event. In other words, we like to say that it adds color to the event itself. So again, in this case, if you have played song, an event property would be the song name or song title, song genre, year released, how long the song was, the artist, all things that later on you can slice and dice your data and get more information about that event. On the other hand, we have what are called user profiles, and user profiles reflect information that describe the users taking the action. As we can see here, a lot of times they're demographics, so it'll describe, where the user is based, the age group they fall under, their gender, things like that. And as you can imagine, user properties are things that can change over time. It could be something that stays the same over time, but it also could be something that changes. So a great example here is age. That's something that's going to change every year. for all of us, unfortunately. Or you also have the account status. So if you're, in this case, if you have a freemium model of your product, or if you have a premium model, that's something that you definitely want to track over time and see if there are changes there. Great, so now that we have the principles down, let's take a look at how to actually translate that into Mixpanel. We recommend creating a tracking plan, what we call a tracking plan, sometimes an implementation spec, that presents those business goals and analytics questions while you're setting up Mixpanel. Now, this tracking plan should clearly outline your events, those events properties that we described, as well as the user properties that would be aligned with your KPIs and business goals. Now, this is actually our tip number 4, which is to create this document, have a living source of truth, and most importantly, assign ownership. We find that this last piece is really crucial. We do see sometimes customers having this document or starting off with an implementation spec or a tracking plan, but there's no clear ownership. And so over time, as your implementation adjusts and changes, there's not really one person, excuse me, driving those updates and making sure that things are up to date and still referenceable by the rest of your team, right? So really making sure that you assign ownership to this document is one of the things that we highlight here. And ultimately, your tracking plan will serve as a map for implementing Mixpanel. And more importantly, it'll also serve as a reference for ensuring that meaningful events and properties are being collected. So it really should be treated as a mutable document that is continuously updated with any implementation changes or notes that anyone on your team, anyone new on your team or who wasn't part of implementation can always refer back to. The other great thing here is that we also have this available as a resource to all of you with a lot of examples, as we can see here, how you would define these events. So this is also something that is available to you. But so I definitely we wanted to kind of give you all a bit of an idea of some best practices, right, Kylie? So we have, more detailed items that I can drive into a little bit, but, at a high level, I think this would be our recommended approach, right?
Yeah, so taking everything Giovanna just said about like building a map to your data and like building up a tracking plan so that all of your goals and metrics are kind of translated into measurable tasks and then moved into Mixpanel is the way to do it. And we have some like really high level like tips to make that super simple and clean. Event depth, like making sure your events are not too broad, not too narrow. Things like page view or button click, right, are very generic, but then things like blue button click on homepage for FAQ, right, is like hyper specific and not going to help you in kind of the same way as just button click. So making sure you find like a good balance of specificity, but also like far reaching so you can get the most use out of those event properties. They're the color of your events, as Giovanna was saying, but then also like being sure that you can kind of replicate or scale events across your user's journey for like style of events or actions. Making sure your naming convention is good across the board. Make it concise, use descriptive action verbs, and remember that Mixpanel is case sensitive. So as you're naming things, like make sure you're using the right consistency of like capital letters to lowercase letters, and make sure that you're using underscores or spaces in the same way across the board so you're never confused about what you're looking at or what you're searching for. Make sure your data format is smart because you want to have dates passing as numbers or time passing as numbers. You want to have items that need to pass as strings so that you can sort, group, and capitalize on how you want to like slice and dice those pieces of data, grouping and pivoting them inside of Mixpanel. Be smart about the default properties Mixpanel offers. We have a host of default properties that we have found are generally useful for a number of use cases, but then also be aware that they exist so that you're not pulling in identical data and then confusing or cluttering your lexicon or your internal setup. And then, like Giovanna has said a number of times, like keep this dynamic, keep it live, give accountability and ownership to one person or maybe a couple of people so that quarterly or monthly you can run a data audit and see what's useful, what's being queried often, what looks clean, what looks tight, what matches your naming convention and doesn't, and you have like a good pulse on what it is your Mixpanel project looks like.
Yeah, and Kylie, you actually just uncovered tip number 5.
No way.
Yes way. So tip number 5 for everyone here today is to really follow data governance best practices. We do find, these may seem very straightforward and hopefully it's resonating with all of you, but you'd be surprised how often this comes up. So I'd love to walk you guys through a couple of examples to see if maybe this is something that is happening with your implementation today, and again, cover some of the best ways and different ways that you can approach them and improve them. So as we looked at earlier, as Kylie mentioned, we have what we call broad events. And so in this case, we have the example here of a button click. As you can imagine, that doesn't really give you much. And especially as a lot of data comes in, you're going to have an overinflated number of events for button click, and then a lot of properties probably giving more information, right? Page, where this button was clicked, what the action actually was, what they did, things like that. So again, it doesn't tell you much, right? So what we recommend here, for example, is actually bucketing them out into the different sections, areas of your product, and then creating specific events for them. So in this case, for example, we've broken it out from a button click into a play song event or update picture event or a logout event. So when you do your breakouts of your data, instead of just having, a numerous amount of button click events, you'll actually be able to say and look at them in comparison to each other and say, okay, they are playing songs a lot more than they are updating pictures, which would make sense. The opposite of that and what we have here are the narrow events. So as you can see, as you're going through this process, you definitely want to be careful to not break this out too much, or you're going to end up with too many narrow events. So we can see in this example here, an event for each one of these actions. So add a shirt to cart, add a hoodie to cart, add socks to cart. You can imagine, you're going, if you wanted to see, for example, add how many items were added to cart, you're going to have to look at all of these individually and then add them up to get that total number. So instead, what we would recommend here is having one single event that's called add to cart. And then you could have an item as an event property where it would tell you what was actually added to a cart, whether that was a shirt or a hoodie or socks and so forth. Of course, you would still be able to break this down and slice and dice your data as much as you want. But by default, when you go over to your insights, for example, your funnels, you'd be able to tell, okay, they added item to cart and then they went and did something else, or they added items to cart over and over, but I actually want to know which types of items. Then you're able to break that down, which is fine, but at least now you have that comprehensive view of how many items were added to the cart. Next, we have the incorrect data format. So we highly recommend familiarizing yourself and your dev team as they're going through, the implementation process or revisiting process to get familiar with Mixpanel's supported data formats. So we have strings, numeric, data, date, Booleans, which are true and false, lists, or incremental values. And this is very important. I can't highlight this enough. We had this actually come up with a customer where they wanted to send us the time played, so how long somebody took playing a video game. And they were supposed to pass it in seconds, right? That's, what we defined in the tracking plan. And the way that the data was coming in was, showing by minutes plus seconds. And because of the colons that we have in here, the system was actually reading them as a string, so as an alphanumeric value. So because of that, the system wasn't able to do any of the supported calculations, formulas, apply any of the formulas, bucketing, anything of the sort. So the recommended approach here would be to pass that time played all in seconds, right? So essentially 2 minutes, 37 seconds translates to a total of 157 seconds. So now once all of your data is coming in numeric format, you'd be able to apply bucketing, different formulas. You can divide it by 60 and get the actual number of minutes, all of that information by having everything consistently in one single format. And then finally, we have the naming convention, as Kylie mentioned. And again, a lot of these may seem very straightforward to all of you, and you'll be surprised at how often we find these in customers' implementations, right? You have, here's a great example of user plays song, picture updated, logging out. We have a combination of different verb tenses. We have underscores, we have spaces, we have capital letters, not capital letters. And so the recommended approach here is to keep everything concise and consistent. So play song, update picture, log out. I recently just saw this come up on a ticket to our support team where the customer wanted to investigate what seemed to be duplicate events coming in. So they pointed out, these two events are coming in and they should be the same. And upon further investigation by our support team, they found that there was actually an extra space in one of the events. So really, to the naked eye, you looked at it and it looked like the same identical events, but upon investigation, it had, an extra space. And of course, the customer probably took some time to investigate a little bit ahead of time. They had to take the time to reach out to support. Support had to take the time to investigate, and by the time they probably got back to them, that was, a lot of time spent that if they had taken the time, to go through the naming convention in the beginning, some of those items could have been avoided. So just a couple of things that we'd like to highlight here. So with that, again, you may be asking yourself, you may be saying to yourself, well, yeah, we do have a lot of narrow events, and yes, actually, we're probably guilty of that there too. And at the same time, you may also be asking yourselves, okay, but we've already implemented. What do I do? Do I need to pull in my dev team again to clean this up? And lucky for you, you really don't. And this is really, I think, I shouldn't say you don't, but there are certainly lots of things that you can do with Mixpanel. And I think I would personally say this is my favorite part of the presentation. I would call it, the creme de la creme of implementation for a lot of you guys, where you can really take advantage of using Mixpanel's lexicon. I'm gonna get into the tool in just a second here and walk you guys through what you can do and ways that you can improve your implementation. But we do find, surprisingly, that we have a lot of customers not taking full advantage of the lexicon, and there's just so much that you can do. So especially if you're a part of that group who said, well, but we've implemented it before, or how do I fix my implementation? This is really for you. And this is tip number 6, which is to leverage your Mixpanel lexicon. So with that, let me hop on over to the dashboard. And so you should be familiar with Mixpanel by now, hopefully. If not, this would be, a typical dashboard that you have put together. From here, we're really going to be focusing on the lexicon piece under the data management tab. So once we head on over, the first thing I wanted to call out here is, well, for those of you not familiar, essentially your lexicon is your data dictionary. So this is everything that all of the data, the events, the properties, everything that is coming in to Mixpanel. So you can see you have your event name, display name, description, status, all of those items available here for you. So the first thing that I would really like to focus on is the volume. Now, this is my demo and test account, so unfortunately I don't have any volume for any of these items, but the idea here is that this column will give you the volume of data, the number of events that are coming into Mixpanel, or that have come into Mixpanel this last month. So it'll tell you, the volume, the number of events that have come in for this particular event in the last month. And our first recommendation here is that you should be asking yourselves, are our events too cluttered? When you log in, when you go into your lexicon, what is the number of events that you see? Are you in the dozens, hundreds, or are you in the thousands? If you're in the thousands, you should probably be asking yourself, okay, well, is there volume? You know, are we actually generating data for all of these events? And when you download your lexicon, you're actually able to do what we recommend, taking a look at your active events and making sure that they reflect at least 20% of your total events. So if you're getting, if you have a lot of events with zero volume coming in, that should probably be an indication that those events are probably not meaningful to you or your team. The second piece here that I recommend looking at is the queries. And the query number refers to it refers to whether the event itself is actually being leveraged in the report. So is your team creating reports, insights, funnels, and so forth by using these events, right? And this number I think is extremely important because it could tell you a couple of things. So if you find that you have a lot of events who are not being used in reports at all, it could tell you, well, maybe these events aren't important. You know, the team doesn't really care, there's no value, therefore we're not creating reports for them. Or the opposite hand, it could say, you know, as a manager or as someone looking at this, you can say, well, I know for a fact that this event is extremely meaningful, so why is no one searching on them? Why is no one creating reports for them? And that should be a clear indication for training. Right, so definitely take a look at these two. A couple of other things that you can do here, as we'll see, when you select a couple of or one or more events, you have the ability to either hide or tag or drop them. Hiding just means that you're removing them from the UI. So the data is still coming in, but it won't be showing in the report creation section to your users, to the rest of your team. So if you see, okay, there's just too many events, it's too clouded, you know, we just want to hide it for now. If you're unsure that you want to stop tracking it forever, you can just hide it. On the opposite hand, if you know for a fact that that event is no longer meaningful, then you can actually drop it completely for your implementation. One great example here could be, for example, when you've deprecated a feature. So let's say that you used to have an event that you no longer track, you no longer have, you know, the functionality is gone altogether. So you could just drop it altogether from Mixpanel and stop bringing it in at all. So wanted to quickly show you guys what that looks like. The status will now change from hidden, from visible to hidden, and then you can also just go ahead and unhide it. One other item that we like to highlight here is the ability to merge different events. So again, if you're looking at, you know, this is actually something that we recommend looking at, which is event similarity. So when you download your CSV, you'll be able to find, you know, well, are these events kind of really meaning the same thing? Did we create, you know, a super long funnel? Maybe we need to pull them together a little bit more. One of the things you can do is merge those two events. When you do that, you'll be able to actually, you know, see the two or more events that you're merging, and you can select the event that you want the future, you know, events for those two to come in under. So you set it to that event, you click merge, and from there you'll be able to see the status again will change. So you have now the merged, and then if you were to select it again, you would see the option to unmerge. Oops, my internet just caught up to me there. So yeah, so you'd be able to unmerge. Okay, perfect. So one other thing I wanted to really highlight here before we move over to a couple of other areas of Mixpanel is the ability to fix those typos and inconsistencies right within, you know, the lexicon itself. So let's say you were guilty of having, you know, different underscores, different capitalization. The display name is actually something that you can do to just change the name of the event that is shown within the report section. So here I have this great example where we called it a membership change, but really what it's doing is it's reflecting an account status change. So I want to change that display name. And from there, I also want to give a little bit more description so that when my coworkers, my colleagues hover over it, they'll be able to tell like this, okay, so this event refers to when a user updates their membership, therefore changing their account status. So this is something that is available to you today that you can definitely start taking advantage of. So now I want to hop on over to Insights, and I want to show you guys one of my favorite features, which we call custom properties. So for those of you not familiar with custom properties essentially allow you to edit and work with your existing data to have it display the information in different ways that make more sense to you. Essentially, they work sort of like Excel formulas that you can apply to your data. So looking at this example here, we have a page visit. They're, you know, on my page, and I have a source. So I'm looking at the campaign source. Where is this person coming from? They're coming from the email. They're coming from Facebook, YouTube, Google AdWords. They're organic, or they're coming from Twitter. What I would like to do here instead is I actually want to combine Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube all into social. So what I would do is you have the option here to create a custom property. I'm going to go into one that I had already created. I'm going to click Edit Custom Property so you guys can see what that looks like. And so this would say, if the campaign source equals LinkedIn, then display it as social. If it equals Facebook, display it as social. If it equals Twitter, display it as social. If it equals email, leave it as is, as email. If it's Google AdWords, leave it as Google AdWords. And if it's organic, leave it as organic. So you're making that update there. And from there, now that we have it broken out, let me actually pull it above so you guys can get an even better view of what that looks like. But so here you can see, for example, that social now actually includes Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Email is still email, Google AdWords is still Google AdWords, and organic is still organic. So you can even just go ahead and remove source altogether. So now you have it broken out by social, email, AdWords, and organic. So you can see how this instantly changes, you know, the display of your data, even though you didn't necessarily change or alter any of your configuration or development work, right? And there's just so much that you can do with custom properties across the board, you know, in different functions that you can leverage. And I know we're coming up right on time here, so the last item I wanted to quickly bring up are undefineds that we do see come up, you know, in questions often. And essentially what this means is that you're selecting properties that you're segmenting by properties that aren't always sent along with the event you're analyzing. So in this particular case, I'm looking at a video category. And what this is telling me is that for a majority, or for some of my videos, I do have the category set, and I am getting that data. But in some cases, and I'm assuming this is not a required setting, or sometimes there are videos out there that don't have a category, then that value would be passed as undefined. So there's no value there, right? So in other words, it's actually not available. So you would you would see it as undefined as opposed to, you know, the actual value if it had one. So just something for you to keep in mind, and perhaps be able to loop in your engineering team, your development team, and say, okay, are there areas where we could, when we know the value doesn't exist, instead of just passing it as blank, maybe we could pass it as NA, not applicable, because then from there you'd be able to get a clear indication that, you know, there's no value as opposed to seeing undefined in your data and not being able to instantly identify what's going on there. If it's still coming in and it's something that you want to remove from your analysis, you can, if you just click on it, you can actually just go ahead and exclude it. And what that does is just saying that, you know, the data that you want to look at is set. And when you do that, it should give you all of the data that you hadn't before by excluding that specific one. In this case, again, I'm looking at my demo account, so that's why we're seeing, you know, no data available, but it should give you all of the data without those undefined values. Great. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on back to Kylie.
Yeah, so we just want to kind of wrap up and walk through all the tips that we hit on today. So walking through them one by one, like begin with the end in mind. Make sure you have not just a plan, but like your goals that you've laid out in our metrics framework, and then taken the time to map your goals into a tracking plan of some kind so that you can align the events in Mixpanel to like the change you want to see and the value you want your users to uncover, and then know how to color those events with your event properties and metadata to really describe and segment like Giovanna walked us through. Be sure to keep this dynamic. This should be a living process, not a one and done by any means. You should be able to revisit your goals quarterly, monthly, weekly, even sometimes at that level 2. And then also revisit your Mixpanel, the lexicon, your hiding and dropping, merging, custom properties as like your user journey changes or what it is you're delivering might change. Then don't track everything. Giovanna's favorite coin term is rich in data, weak in poor in insights. So being sure to have like the correct data, like in the appropriate amount where it makes sense, and you're really focused and like dialed into what your customers are doing and how you can make their lives better. Assign this to someone, make it accountable so that there's like a point of contact, someone who's keeping tabs and keeping a pulse on everything that's going on. Give someone the accountability to be the source of truth and the owner of this project. Keep in mind all the data governance best practices, everything we've talked to you about naming convention, and like what you need to do to set yourself up for success. And then if you ever find that you're a little bit below the bar, or like maybe there's some space for improvement, like make sure to jump into lexicon and use like the front end of Mixpanel to tighten up, clean up, practice good data hygiene instead of having to go through all of the rigmarole of pulling in your dev resources or pulling your engineers off other mission critical pieces of work. Like you can do a lot of the tidying up yourself live in Mixpanel.
Yeah, great, Kylie. So I know we're right at time here, but we would definitely be happy to stay on a little longer and see if there were any questions from everyone, but essentially from anyone. But our goal here today was really to, you know, give you all a good starting point, hopefully help you identify, you know, what to track or what to clean up if you're already tracking, and also from there, you know, essentially start reaping the benefits of a powerful analytics program and really drive data innovation and product-led growth through your analytics.